is a masterful marketer and has his finger on, I call it the zeitgeist of the at least half the country. I don't know if it's the other half, but this guy, I used to be one of his bankers, which I probably told you way back when.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Sure.
But we'll see.
And there is raw intelligence, and then there is intestinal fortitude, and the latter is what makes you the money. So that's just this is not a real estate podcast, but you and I both know that.
No, and how he has endured everything is really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
If you roll the clock back over the last year, you say, "Oh my God, this the lawsuits, everything." It's just it's kind of amazing.
Craig Hatkoff is a real estate investor who pioneered the concept of asset securitization back in the 1990s at Chemical Bank, and then became a vice chairman of Capital Trust, which he co-founded alongside the legendary billionaire Sam Zell. He's also a board member for more than 15 private and public companies as varied as Colony Capital, SL Green, the Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation, and even the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A sometime Columbia professor on the topic of disruptive innovation, he worked closely with the late Clayton Christensen and eventually also co-founded the Disruptor Awards. Along the way, he found some time to launch a media company and become a best-selling author of children's books alongside his two daughters. But what Craig is most popularly known for is his role as a co-founder, alongside Robert DeNiro and Jane Rosenthal, of the Tribeca Film Festival. And it wasn't started for the reasons you think, so versatile doesn't even begin to describe him. There are so many adjectives. On today's podcast, we start off with the light bulb moment of his youth when he was almost but not quite fired, and whether it was cluelessness or arrogance that got him there. We talk about the time that he was one of Donald Trump's bankers, the guitar collection that reminds him of the path not taken, and the way he thinks today about religion. Turns out that's ripe for disruption too. Listen to the end for the lightning round, where Craig reveals what he would be doing had he not stumbled onto business school somehow all those decades ago. It's not what you'd think, and on some level, aren't we all still who we were back in the 7th grade?
If there's one thing you can credit Donald Trump with, it is staying power. Nobody's going to disagree.
He is resilient.
Yes, he's resilient.
But
there's lots of other there's lots of other adjectives that come to mind, and one might be arrogant, which pulls me into my first question that I was thinking about you. So you were described in that article in Fast Company as being arrogant, and I don't know if that was your description or the interviewer's description at the time, but I would like to understand how you look back at the day when Chemical Bank delicately suggested you consider another career in your 20s and how you felt about it.
It was not exactly delicate. When they said, "We'd like you to come sit down," and it was my boss's boss, and my boss's boss's boss, I thought they were bringing me in to tell me I'd been elevated to the CEO of Chemical Bank. That, of course, was why they were bringing me in. And when I got in there, they said, "We're not sure why. You seem very smart. Everything. But this just doesn't seem to be a good fit with your personality." So it was, I don't know if I would call that completely delicate. They said, go sit in a corner for 30 days, think about what you really want to do, and see if you really think this is something for you. And it was during that 30-day period where I was just completely 180 degrees. That's why I say unaware. I thought I was doing a great job. And that's, I think, the thing about arrogance and hubris is a slightly different context. It feels a little bit more Greek, Greek tragedy or comedy, whatever it's going to be. And it was during that 30-day period that I said, "Oh my God, I'm about to have like a major failure here." And I came up with an idea that kind of was one of the earliest prototypes for asset securitization. And it was using financial guarantees for the bank as opposed to funding loans. And
they say the first cut is the deepest relationship-wise. I think the first punch is the hardest, ego-wise.
Oh, yeah.
Was it more arrogance or cluelessness?
I don't think I knew I was being arrogant. I think it really was, cluelessness was my sense. And and I would juxtapose, arrogance in your 20s versus arrogance in your 70s. When I was 20, I thought I knew everything. And now that I'm in my 70s, I just turned 70, it's amazing. I know nothing. So I just had no idea. And I then just kind of rose to the challenge. Wasn't quite as dramatic as events of the last weekend with, Donald Trump, like literally rising from the dead. That's one for the history books. This is in my book was like, wow, you just completely missed it. And so I started one by one making different kinds of relationships with the people there. I actually took my boss, not my boss's boss's boss, who delivered the message. And I took her out to lunch. I said, I just don't understand, we should be really good friends. We have all these interests. And she kind of just said, you have to stop acting like such a jerk. And I just had no idea. So,
there's a humility in that. Not everybody in their 20s, when they get that first punch to the ego, is going to take someone out to lunch and say, I don't get it.
I very much wanted to be sort of, on the team. And I can't remember the specifics. I'm just not a process-oriented person. That's not, I'm much more Picasso than Rembrandt, if that makes any sense. And so I just kind of sucked it up. And when I had this memo that came out, it really kind of turbocharged my career. But it was like a 3-page memo.
Yeah.
It was pretty compelling because I just, I didn't really understand the banking business unto itself. Fractional reserve banking is a kind of challenging concept. And I look back now and say, I can't believe I got this all the way from that original memo to, we've done billions of dollars worth of business. And it was really kind of a remarkable, wow, I dodged that bullet. No pun intended. That was just, I thought I was going to get fired. And they just gave me a second chance. And actually, my greatest supporter throughout, who sadly just passed away in the last year or so, became my biggest supporter, even though he was the one who had to read the riot act to me.
And this concept of leadership cannot be overstated, because she must have recognized in you that you had some sort of raw intellectual power that made it worth giving you one chance to stick around, and that paid off for Chemical Bank.
Yeah, and then we became incredibly close after that. I think
you show your humility, you show your soft underbelly, and people like you.
I'll share a little. I don't usually tell this anecdote, but because you're talking about things like leadership, they used to have, when you get to the bank early on, they stick you through a training program, and you get identified as a high pot, which is a high potential corporate asset.
Okay.
And so they start cultivating you. They would send certain people to Outward Bound.
I remember that.
Remember those days?
Yeah.
And the one she was going to was on a boat where, you were on a boat with 12 people. And if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to walk up to the front of the boat and go off the boat. That kind of bonding experience. I don't know if you ever had that in today's world, but, and I think I said to her very nicely, I said, I don't know what's wrong, but I thought I had to come talk to you because I know you're going to Outward Bound. And I just keep thinking, I hope she falls off and drowns. And that's just not a healthy thing. I don't know what's wrong. Can you help me? And so I think no one had ever said something like that. Talking about people who were unfiltered and direct. That was pretty, and I wasn't threatening. It was just saying, help me. Tell me what I need to do. It's that
you had no filter. You had absolutely no filter.
It was pretty, well, if it was a filter, you have boulders making it through that filter. So
right.
Straining out little tiny nuggets of gold. It was the big boulders. But that was such I remember all these inflection points. It's like, where were you when? And we had just had one this past weekend. I remember exactly where I was when John Kennedy was shot and who told me. This is, it's pretty remarkable. So I think
the towers fell and all the things.
Yeah. And, and I'd say if there's one attribute that is critical and that I think I've over time been able to really embrace is the resilience. If you get knocked down, as Joe Biden says you get back up. So we're talking sort of after 1971 through 73, with going off the gold standard, interest rates going, starting, at least back then, at the time, record highs. And it was a great period of chaos. And what I've learned personally is literally I will do much better in chaotic situations than very well organized situations. Tend to be somewhat introspective. I have lots of friends, but the inner circle is fairly constrained. But when you learn that what it really means to challenge everything and realize how little we actually do know, it becomes part of a worldview and value system.
Well, and there is opportunity in chaos, right? There's opportunity in inefficiency and there's opportunity in chaos. And I think that's sort of a through line in your career.
Yeah, and I think that chaos is a very interesting change agent, as you just articulated. But I learned the power of telling compelling stories throughout my career. People don't really either respond well or remember a whole list of facts. And it's not about winning just the minds. You have to win hearts and minds. Mm-hmm. And that's where the power of storytelling comes in. So even when I had this crazy idea about financial guarantees, it was just a natural instinct, of mine. It's how I laid it out. So I just don't. Why do we always make loans and keep them on our books? Mm-hmm. Why don't we, put, rather than using our own cash or capital, we can use guarantees to enhance an overall, in this case, what you'd call CMBS, even though it was pre-conduit CMBS. Mm-hmm. And here I had a partner by the name of John Klopp, and it was kind of just the two of us. We were at that time, the two hotshots.
Yeah, the young hotshots, right? Young upstart.
And we did, I'll tell the funny story. We, institutional investor, which was the Bible at that time, that was the gold standard, did a big story on us. And for the photo of us, they put us sitting on top of a conference room table to make us look like we were very, here to shake things up. I didn't even think about it. And what I realized after the fact, that really rubbed a lot of the old guard the wrong way.
And theatrics matter. They matter in an article. They matter in the Tribeca Film Festival. They matter in board governance. Theatrics, earlier this year, you just went through the Disney proxy fight as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was very subtle, but we were, in theory, supporting Disney and just saying you need some new sets of
additional
expertise. For example, I started looking at the real estate that Disney owns and said they give no information on what's in the real estate. The real estate may be worth as much as the entire company's market cap right now without anything else. And so we kind of looked at it. We said it's a sum of the parts analysis, not just looking at, sometimes when you have these conglomerates, the stock price reflects the weakest link in the chain. As opposed to, that's why you have spin-offs, and that's why you separate companies like Google to allow the high multiple businesses to really get reflected in the stock price. And the other ones will go to Apollo and Carlyle. That's the kind of the bacterial process of corporate America. You can't
bacterial process of corporate America. That's a good tagline. That'll be the title of the podcast. The bacterial process of corporate America.
And here's the takeaway. You can't make yogurt without the bacteria. And so it's like the pilot fish swimming around, the big sharks, they eat all the little crumbs that keep the system healthy.
So you've been surrounded by sharks your entire career. You've written bestsellers, children's novels with your daughters. You're very creative. You're very involved in that part of the world beyond the film festival, as well as being a public and private board member in real estate and finance. Not a lot of people are going to be able to operate in both of those worlds, and you have been doing it for 4 or 5 decades at this point. The philosophical question, not to make it
no one has put it in that. No one has used the decades metric.
All right, a couple decades. How about that? A couple decades.
Okay, no, you're right. I'm just saying, but that's sort of the delight. Say, wow, I really have been doing this.
Is it tougher in your experience to manage the arrogance in the world of public company boards, or in the world of film and movies and actors and actresses?
I think if you're making the comparison with public company boards or boards of directors, and I have to come back to sort of, I'm going to call it Einstein's general theory of relativity and then the special theory. There are always going to be exceptions. But I find the movie business inherently, particularly as you get closer to the talent, they have these egos, but it's very understandable when you've seen it up close and personal. Why? Why do they wear sunglasses all the time? Well, the answer is when you're walking down a red carpet and there are 1,000 lights, flashing. I was always metaphorically 5 steps behind Robert DeNiro walking down a red carpet. And as Bob's going down, every photographer in the world, the lights are going off. The second he passes, fades to black.
Darkness.
There's nothing more humbling than $6. And once you understand the process, it really says, that's not so crazy. I understand it. We all have our pathologies, I'll call it that way. And, talent tends to have a narcissistic gene in them, which is part of one of the reasons they have this charisma in the first place. So I'd say that the movie industry is much more diverse. It's much more, very California, liberal, etc. And the banking business, and to me, I think the key to understanding whether it's a private company or public company is to first, once you arrive on a board, the first 6 to 12 months, figure out where the light switches are.
Right.
Don't jump in.
Figure out the lay of the land, right, in public boards.
And if you really get it down, you almost don't have to survey in person what each person, how they're going to react to any particular issue. You should know what they're going to say. Now, you may have to change their minds a bit, but you know how they'll react. And so there shouldn't be as many surprises. Disney has been, called by many. It's not my idea that, it is a fairly arrogant company in a corporate sense. We don't need anybody. We can do it ourselves, et cetera. And the process, coming back to the disruption, there's a reason it's usually 2 guys in a garage that decimate the industry incumbents. And I think that there's an underlying current that one of the things that drives the financial system is the second, I'm going to call it the regulators. I mean that writ large. It could be the SEC, it could be the accounting firms, it could be, the FDIC, it could be the Federal Trade. They keep putting on layer upon layer of complexity. And what that does is it gives an opportunity. We used to call it IQ arbitrage, that the whole point of being a banker is to get around these strictures that these other stakeholders have imposed upon them. And the truly clever people will figure out how to get around it. That's kind of what they do. And so, so we see these disruptions, and that's kind of really where my lens sort of, it wasn't a single lens. I kind of had how those photographers have their fisheye lenses, their telephoto lenses, the up close, having a lot of different lenses. One lens doesn't, one size doesn't fit all. And so that's a little bit, what tools do you use and in what situation?
You are rewarded in academia for rooting out your own bias, whereas you're rewarded in real estate and finance and the worlds that you and I have been in for certainty. So it's not a situation that creates a lot of openness to disruption and change. And so that kind of leads me into your work with Clayton Christensen. His theory of disruptive innovation essentially describes the process by which a product or service takes root initially with applications at the bottom of a market and then sort of relentlessly moves up. And there's reasons why systems at large companies are not set up to encourage that type of disruptive innovation. You work together on a lot of different things with Clayton. What, if anything, did you two disagree on?
Well, it's a funny you ask that question because Clay's unbelievable humility. I mean, I've never seen anybody given his stature. We really never disagreed on anything, but his whole premise in his office and back, there was a sign that says, "Show me the anomalies." And our relationship, which includes Erwin Kula, who's an 8th-generation rabbi, so the joke was always a professor or a rabbi, an entrepreneur walk into a bar, was to find things that his theory didn't explain. And so he could refine his theory. So rather than resisting someone who says, no, that theory, that doesn't work, and they start digging the heels in. And I give you lots of examples of what that is. Clay was, oh, wow, I have to, this is great. I have to rethink my whole theory. And what we really, I'd say my work and Erwin Kula's work with Clay was to identify a different kind of disruption than what I'll call Clay Christensen 1.0. And we said, if you're dealing with a single job to be done and a single product, it's pretty straightforward. It's a utility. Do you care what brand MP3 you're listening to? It doesn't matter. Do you care about your kid's teacher? You sure do.
Matters.
And so when you deal with change in any kind of system where it challenges people's core identities, worldviews, values, and belief systems, you end up finding you have lots of different jobs to be done and lots of different stakeholders.
To get the kids out of my house for a little while before they start their lives.
So we actually, with Clay, he actually ended up resisting his own moniker for disruptive innovation. He said, I should never have called it disruptive, because everything became disruptive this, disruptive that. Clay would, refer to himself as a profound theorist. That's why show me the anomalies so I can make my theory better. We actually opened up with him informally. He would call us the advanced research department to look at this as you have to crawl up inside and see what makes people tick. Forget the technology. It's more about the business model and the culture.
And consider the audience, right? The conclusion is consider the audience.
So if you look at the U.S., we resisted antiseptic surgery for 20 years. And it took an event. It was, a ruptured appendix of, I think, at the coronation of, I think it was Edward VII, whoever the king, and they actually saved his life by operating. Most of the time, you died from infection.
Wow, yeah.
And, antiseptic surgery by Joseph Lister was a little carbolic acid and a little vinegar stirred up, and, wow, you kill all the germs. The U.S., they didn't believe in germ theory until the assassination of Garfield. That was the inflection point. Yeah. So where we got Clay to sort of spend his time, he devoted a lot of time to, and gave us his name, which is probably more important. He found this fascinating, and we literally had utility-centric innovation is one set of dynamics, and identity-centric is another set. And the key was to understand who, I'm going to call them the naysayers, figure out what their position is, and how not to go around their backs, but work around it with them.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Clay being very humble. That's not at all surprising to me for a couple of reasons. One is there's a gratitude that comes with having your work recognized on that level. It's similar to the couple of billionaires that I've met. It's a different approach to walking through the world, and it's calmer because at some point you have to realize the myriad of things that had to go right for you to exist and have the opportunities that you have in this world. Clay Christensen is not the only person who could have ever been Clay Christensen. But I do think it's useful to note, and he probably knew that, not having met him, but it seems like that. I think it's useful to note also being Mormon. They will not drink, they will not have coffee, but they are not going to let that prevent them from being a part of the larger world and the social structures. So they had to early on figure out how to do it without bumping up against other people's values.
Well, when Erwin Kula and I first met Clay, and there's a whole backstory to how he ended up there, but Clay had never applied his own theory to religion and spirituality. The rabbi, Erwin Kula, knew a lot about what was happening in the field of religion, the demographics. We're having the fastest growing cohort in the religion, for denominations was none, N-O-N-E. And so,
this was what year? Give us context.
This goes back to about 2000. It started probably early 2000s, 2002,
Right
2000.
around 9/11, people are losing their religion. What a surprise.
Well, they were losing the institutional religion. They weren't losing their
For sure.
yearning or need for something spiritual.
Sure.
How do you extract the wisdom and the knowledge from the dogma, creed, and practices? If those don't work for you, that doesn't mean you're not Jewish. In my case, he said, "Well, I just never lit the candles at Shabbat." And he says, "Well, do you like fires in a fireplace?" I said, "I love them." He said, "Go sit by the fireplace."
Yeah.
That's a spiritual practice. And we would have for 4 or 5 years, every Sunday we would go to the same restaurant at the same table and have our Sunday morning breakfast, which would go 2-3 hours at a clip, and that was a sacred place. Now, most people don't think of that in an innovation context. It's like, what do you mean you're sitting at Le Pain Quotidien? How's that a sacred place? Answer: a sacred place can be whatever we deem it is.
Draw the connection, though, for me in a simple way between the fact that people are losing traditional religion 2000s to disruption in religion.
Right. So the trends were unmistakable. That Judaism, if you look at a pie chart, is right now a line. It's not a slice of the pie. It's got off. And Irwin's view, based on the Pew study. I mean, he was. We were reading everything. That by 2050, I'm picking a somewhat arbitrary, that from intermarriage, divorce, death, Judaism would not be recognizable as a major world religion. Now, it's a lot beyond that, beyond in terms of how it impacted religion. But it starts with, what job are you trying to get done?
Right. What's the goal in talking about this?
And if it's to use it to help you flourish, you don't need anybody's permission to do a practice.
Right.
What we were, our mission with Clay was to find things that were unexpected, that, he hadn't thought about. That was sort of, he would sit at the awards with his laptop, and honoree by honoree, he would take notes. And at the end of the awards, he would come up to tie it all together. He said, "Let me tell you what I saw here today."
In the Disruptor Awards.
The Disruptor Awards, which, we're part of Tribeca now. We're doing it independently. But Clay actually made a pronouncement, shocked even, I think Irwin and I were kind of shocked. He said the 3 areas that are in desperate need of disruption in America, one is parenting, the other is terrorism, and the third is religion. These are not getting the job, we're just not getting the jobs done. Why do we have terrorists? And the answer is, well, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
Crusader.
And it's this whole notion of, I will call it, nothing is black or white.
With the intention of learning how to be more curious about each other rather than judgmental?
Curious, aware, open-minded, and humble. Because if you can show someone, if I can prove to you that what you're seeing isn't really what's there by deconstructing it, and you could ask a question. Are you familiar with the FedEx logo?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We always use the FedEx logo. Look at the negative spaces, don't look at the positive spaces. Exactly. And one of my favorite honorees was Lyndon Leader, who created the FedEx logo. And he gave us the whole story. And once you realize this, I've been looking at this thing 100,000 times, I never saw the arrow. The wisdom said, okay, what else are you missing? Look again, then look again, then keep looking. And every time you look, at some point you may say, aha, I get it now.
So,
and that's it's a spiritual connotation. Mm-hmm. What are the things that you're missing, whether it's your family, going to school with your kid. It helps you, these are tools that are intended to help you flourish.
And to make you better at being a member of society, to make you more peaceful, to help you to connect.
Yeah, and it's great when, and normally at this point, because we've been doing this for 20 years, most of the people in our, let's call it our networks, have now, are aware of the FedEx, but we started using it, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
When you show someone how, you'd say, are you 100% certain you don't see any symbols in that logo? They say, yeah, I'm 100% certain. You then deconstruct and you say, oh, here between the lower part of the E and the X, there's an arrow.
Right.
It's, there's a Latin phrase, quod erat demonstrandum, that which was having to have been proved. You were 100% certain,
Right.
and you were 100% wrong. Now what are you going to do with that insight?
Right. Well, and I'm only in my 5th decade, but I do have enough humility that I know how I'd answer the question. And the answer would be, well, because you asked if I'm really, really certain, then definitely not really, really certain.
That's why I say, I realize how little I know.
You have made more money, had more impact, and seen more and had more access to things than most people can even understand across a lot of different areas of life. And this is not to compliment you. This is, even something as simple as living for years at the Dakota, right? There was a phrase, I think I remember hearing this in the 90s, where people said, not even God, John Lennon, and the Pope could get Madonna into the Dakota. What was the phrase? There was something like that, right? That kind of access gives you perspective. Typically, my question to people is, what do you wish you knew about a parent? And would it change anything when people are looking back at their lives? But for you, it's different. I think you're in a phase of your life where you could be a grandparent, knowing what you know now and having achieved and endured what you have. What would you actually have done differently?
I'm going to give you sort of the philosophical answer. I would change everything, and I would change nothing. It's interesting. The funny thing you talk about looking backwards. I went to Colgate, and back then they had what was called the core curriculum, which included philosophy and religion. And I was sort of, a finance guy waiting to make it into the world of business, and I was going to a liberal arts school because that's just what we did. For I'd say a good 15 or 20 years, I'd said all that philosophy and religion, that probably a waste of time. I don't really use it. Today, I said, oh my God, wow. and to learn the wisdom tradition, which is modernity conflicting with tradition, is, wow, hold on a second. There are multiple truths. This is the postmodern take. Because we can't see, this is where quantum mechanics, you can't see what the other person's seeing. That's always a different perspective. You just think about sculpture versus art. When you're looking at sculpture, you get to walk around at 360 degrees. Doesn't quite work with a piece of art on the wall. Yeah. And so painting versus sculpting is an interesting metaphor to kind of look at things. You can have more illusion in paintings. It's pretty hard to have illusions in sculpture.
To make a leap here, you're making me think art versus sculpture is like dating versus marriage, right? You can't hide what's going on behind the scenes once you're married. And I'm going to take it another step further, and I know you'll appreciate it because it's a real estate connection, which is I used to oversee asset management for a private equity fund. And we used to sit in investment committee with the acquisitions guys. And what I said to the head of acquisitions at one point, we were arguing about some of the assumptions on the deal because I was voting on the investment committee and I did not agree with the business plan. So I was going to vote no because my team couldn't implement it. Look, I get it. You're the acquisitions guy. You're basically the boyfriend. You're whining, you're dining, you're giving them roses, you're telling them how pretty they are. I'm asset management. I'm the wife. Okay? I'm the one who has to tell them they can't spend that money on the roof. So we're not going to agree to the business plan, right? And there's seeing things from this perspective and then seeing them up close. It makes me wonder, what percentage of your time right now do you spend on the corporate pursuits and the boards and things like that versus on really intellectual pursuits? Because that seems to be what you're interested in.
Well, the boards have a different cadence. It tends to be quarterly. I've had 50 cumulative years of public company board experience.
That's a lot of board experience.
That's a lot of, and I wouldn't say I've seen it all, I've done it all, but, I'm rarely shocked or surprised by things. But I think once you realize that there are so many different aspects, that everybody has their own truth, but you really need to understand the other person's truth if you can. And then it may change your view. My views change all the time. There's a famous quote, I think it was Churchill, some British statesman, who said, when the facts change, so do my opinions, sir. What do you do?
Yeah.
And that sort of sums it up. The more experiences you have and the more people you know, the bigger the universe. But
you have to be receptive to it, because I think there's phase one where you are in your parents' home. There is a Indian cultural belief around the phases of life. And the first one is you're learning and you're basically in your father's home, right? Traditionally. The second phase is you are the one married, raising children. This is all obviously planned around men, right? Raising children, taking care of your household, taking care of your parents. Once your children are married and out of your house, you enter the third phase. And that third phase, you're supposed to become almost ascetic. You don't need things, you don't keep trying to achieve, etc. And then phase 3 is maybe the best part, where you figure out you know nothing. And the fun is the discourse, the peeling back of the layers, all of that. It makes me wonder, what would you be doing if you weren't doing this? What do you think would have been a completely different career for Craig Hatkoff? Let's say your brother-in-law who convinced you to go to business school, that didn't happen. That didn't work out. Suddenly one of your other friends was like, hey, join our band. Let's drive across country. It's the summer of love.
Well,
where would you be?
Music, guitar in particular, has been the one constant in my life since I've been 12 years old.
Behind you.
Oh, yeah, you can see, I guess, the background. And, as I tell people, and I have a guitar collection, but it's not, I don't buy them because it's an important guitar that Jimi Hendrix played. That's not my, it's the second I pick up the guitar, I know how to evaluate it and say, ooh, this has a sound, or this stuff, the fretboard. And, you get one guitar a year and you're 70, you end up with a lot of guitars. That one constant has really been an amazing anchor. It's a little bit, to the extent I, at some point, decide they should bury me, it's put my Stratocaster in the coffin, please.
Wow, that much.
Yeah, that, does it look like anything? No, it looks like it fell off a truck. The guitar players who pick it up, I've had some famous, musicians play it. Wow, this is something about this guitar. And, it wasn't particularly expensive. I don't know, but it's, you can see on the fretboard where all the different leads were being played because it's all worn down.
Well, now I need to know the name of the band, right? We're talking about that twist of fate. It would be Craig and the...
Well, it was called the
Rollers.
Four on the Floor.
Four on the Floor.
I was in the 6th grade, and the Beatles had just kind of emerged. Well, I shouldn't say just emerged, but when the Beatles came out, everybody said, "I got to get a guitar." Then the Rolling Stones, and coming back to your question though, you said, "What would you ideally like to do?" Go on the road with a band, not a famous band, just, I have another friend who kind of gave up his career and he does that and he's very happy. He does, home recordings. I say, that would be a great thing for me. If I were to retire, whatever that even means, just, and I get to pick 3 guitars, I'll be very happy, maybe an amplifier or 2.
So you'd be a guitarist, I would be a novelist, and we would both have a lot less money than we have right now. I think it's valuable for people to understand that no matter how successful someone is, they do walk around with what else could have been their life. That image of 4 on the Floor is interesting. Is there a meaning to that?
It was John Cahill, Hank Elitzer, Peter Island, and Craig Hatkoff, 2 6th graders, 2 7th graders, at a battle of the bands. They brought us in as the entertainment.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember how battles, they have 3 bands.
I remember those, yeah.
Okay. And then you vote. And then we had it sort of like, the intermission at, at a football game when they bring out the small players to play, 4 downs in front of the world audience. So we were voted the favorite band that night. I had a cousin who we called Uncle Ralph. Mm-hmm. And he says, why do you play? And I said, yeah, I want to make money and I want to meet girls. He said, you'll look back one day and it'll have nothing to do with the girls. It'll have nothing to do with the money. You'll have a love for your guitar.
My vote, of course, is for the band to get back together and play the opening of the Disruptor Awards or of the next film festival. I'm trying something new on this podcast, which you know is relatively new. A lightning round.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and you can answer them in whatever order you want to answer. Question number 1.
I have to give you a preface. I don't test well. But let's
You don't test.
I never tested well.
There's no wrong answer. There's no wrong answer, except choosing not to answer is the wrong answer.
Okay, that's the problem. Okay.
What did you learn from your daughters? When have you disappointed yourself the most in this life? And what would you tell your 13-year-old self back in 6th grade for on the floor if you could whisper in your own ear? So first question, what did you learn from your daughters?
The meaning of life.
Yeah.
It's
simple.
It's,
when have you disappointed yourself the most in this life?
That's a very hard question to ask because
I know.
I tend not to beat myself up. I don't, you know what it is? I take lots of risks. They obviously don't all pan out. And I'm going to use the Nelson Mandela quote, I never fail, I either win or learn. I'm venture capitalist. I learned from my brother-in-law. You got to make 30 investments and here's what the distribution looks like. And if something goes wrong, 24 of them are going to be zeros and hopefully the 6 will have a little pyramid and, we'll have an Apple, which my brother-in-law is an original investor in Apple.
One of the through lines of this podcast is figuring out how people who have been very successful give themselves grace. And part of the reason why that matters is not because I think they're better at the human condition than other people, but because people who are more successful tend to have failed a lot. And so that's why they're successful. And so you just answered it, right? But I mean, you answered it. Is you're basically giving yourself grace all the time because you're not walking into it with this hardline idea that I'm going to be disappointed in myself if this doesn't go where I think.
Well, let me, I use an example of the Tribeca Film Festival.
Mm-hmm.
When Bob and Jane said, would you like, come join us because we can do the movie.
Bob and Jane, Robert DeNiro, just Bob.
Oh, sorry. Well,
I had to rib you a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I should have said that. That, when they said, come join us, and I realized we had absolutely nothing. What year are you thinking of doing this film festival? I said, it's coming in May. And it's the leap of faith. Don't try and answer all the questions. If someone had given us a business plan, it would never have happened. And we just, as someone said, it got willed into existence and I learned that lesson about we had to make it big and you had to put it on. It wasn't about just showing a couple of films. It was the idea of getting people back on the streets. And that's how I viewed Tribeca. Let's get a few people on the street, but I knew it had to be much bigger than what they were planning. The first budget I saw was for $1 million. And I knowing nothing about films, I said, I'm reading this. I think you're off by at least a 0. Yeah. And then they said, well, can you come in, help us with sponsorships? And so I did that knowing that I'm shocked how successful. It was only supposed to be a one-shot deal, by the way. Yeah. We were going to do it once. And then when American Express came in, they said, we're going to be your sponsor, but you have to do it for 3 years. I said, oh my God, 3 years. How are we going to do that? And then you figure it out.
And people don't understand the history of the Tribeca Film Festival, but it is interesting to note that this was after 9/11. And basically you wanted to help bring New York back to life. I volunteered on the pile. I lived in New York during 9/11. I worked in finance in Midtown and I volunteered on the pile. And I mean, the city was I just remember people walking down the streets crying. Nobody would even respond because we were all just collectively mourning. And back then, we thought 9/11 was the worst thing we would see in our lifetimes.
It was, it's funny because when the museum was completed, this is the memorial and the museum,
Yeah.
I didn't go visit it until I think it was 2017 with someone by the name of Coco Kondo, who was an atom bomb survivor that we have a relationship with. So we did our awards, the Disruptor Awards we did in Hiroshima. But it took me 15 years. I had my own memories of what I'm sure you remember, the smell in the air and, your eyes.
How many people died that day that we all knew? I knew two people.
Yeah, and the answer was get back up on the horse. They're not going to stop us. We saw all the restaurants were in jeopardy of closing in Little Italy and Chinatown, the financial district. We launched a program in, I think it was October of 2001. So September.
I didn't realize it was right after.
Oh yeah.
Back then we were still doing cleanup.
No, we were doing cleanup, but we said these restaurants aren't going to make it. And we did something called Dinner Downtown.
Yeah.
And this was before people even had email. So it was a fax campaign. We'll invite 10 people, have those 10 people invite 10 people. And obviously you have Robert DeNiro and Bill Clinton and Queen Noor. And all of a sudden we were descending on the restaurants. 1,000 people. It wasn't great, but it was good enough to get the job done, which was to get people back on the street.
And we're full circle to the original part of your story, which is there will always be a need for people who come into the chaos and are ready to just roll up their sleeves and get something done. So what would you tell your 13-year-old self, 4 on the floor, playing his guitar, if you could whisper in your own ear now?
It'll be okay. It'll be okay.